The Last of Us Part 1 is a masterpiece. The gameplay, combat, and story made it such a joy to play. And that ending. Oh, the ambiguity between Joel and Ellie was the perfect way to end the game. Mwah. It was so refreshing to have a game developer confident enough to tell a singular story and end it on their own terms. But these days, you have to milk an established franchise for all that it's worth, so we got The Last of Us Part 2. Now, if you haven't played The Last of Us Part 2, or if you're waiting for the upcoming second season of the HBO series, you're probably going to want to watch another one of my videos, because we will be dealing with some major spoilers. Just don't forget to come back after you've played or watched it, because today we're going to be talking about one of the biggest switcheroos in recent gaming memory, playing as Abby for the second half of The Last of Us Part 2. If you were on the internet any time after this game was released, you probably saw this switch was controversial. Some people loved it, while others didn't. But regardless of the internet discourse, being able to see both Ellie and Abby's perspective allows us to see the same story from two distinct perspectives to better understand why they make the decisions they do throughout the game, even if we don't agree with them. Seeing a situation in a new way by taking someone else's perspective isn't just important for the story of The Last of Us Part 2, it's something we can apply to our own lives to better understand and empathize with each other in countless situations. This is What I Learned Playing The Last of Us Part 2. Perspective taking is the ability to understand how and why someone else may view a situation differently from you based on their experiences, personality, values, and biases. Put simply, it's the ability to, metaphorically, put yourself in someone else's shoes and see the situation through their eyes. However, in the case of The Last of Us Part 2, we are quite literally put into both Ellie and Abby's shoes. What's interesting about the perspective taking in this game, though, is that we, the actual player, are the ones being challenged to see the story from two different perspectives, not necessarily the protagonists themselves. For the first half of the game, we are placed firmly into Ellie's perspective, which makes sense, because this is a sequel after all, and the game's trailer promised us another romp through the apocalypse with Ellie and Joel. What I didn't know at the time was the trailer was lying to us, because Joel doesn't make it very far into The Last of Us Part 2. I'm gonna yada yada over some plot points here, but after rescuing a random girl, who we later learn is Abby, Joel and Tommy end up at the mansion where Abby and her friends are stationed. Some tension quickly develops, and Abby shoots Joel in the knee, and proceeds to introduce him to the business end of a golf club. While this is happening, Ellie stumbles across the mansion while looking for Joel, and is forced to experience one of the most tragic scenes in gaming history, Joel's death at the hands of Abby. This causes Ellie to swear vengeance on Abby and her entire group before being knocked out. This event clearly establishes Abby and her friends as the villains of the game from our perspective. We see Abby as this irredeemable monster who came out of nowhere, executed Joel, and disappeared into the night. So needless to say, I felt completely justified piloting Ellie through a 3-day revenge spree where she systematically eliminates each of the WLF members in Abby's group. And just as we get to the final confrontation with Abby, where she seems to be at her most villainous, the game hits us with a black screen, and we shift to Abby's perspective to replay the same 3 days we've already experienced, but from her perspective. This is probably the biggest instance of whiplash I have ever experienced as a gamer, and in all honesty, I was not looking forward to playing as Abby for the rest of the game. But shifting to her perspective is important, because it gives us some much needed insight into why she takes certain actions throughout the game. Up until this point in the story, Abby is framed as a villain, because from our perspective, she took Joel away from us. But there is a critical piece of information we're missing until we switch to Abby's perspective. We learned that the surgeon Joel kills to save Ellie at the end of The Last of Us Part 1 was Abby's dad. Her dad. No wonder she wanted to find Joel. From Abby's perspective, Joel was the irredeemable monster who came out of nowhere, killed her father, and disappeared into the night. That doesn't excuse what she did to Joel, but it does certainly put her decision to hunt him down in a new light. And that right there is the power of perspective taking. Placing us firmly into Abby's perspective for the second half of the game gives us insight into the values and experiences that informed her decision to get revenge on Joel. Even if we don't agree with her actions, knowing that Joel killed her father helps us empathize with her as a person and see that she may in fact be less villainous than we initially thought. Not to mention that over the past 3 days, Abby has lost her entire friend group as a result of Ellie's rampage. When we saw that from Ellie's perspective, each WLF member she crossed off her list felt like a victory. But from Abby's perspective, Ellie feels like a monster hunting down all of her friends. Does that justify the actions Abby takes? Well, I'll let you be the judge of that based on your own perspective. Speaking of your own perspective, each of us has our own perspective through which we see the world and the many situations we're presented with. And we are constantly evaluating how we feel about those situations based on our personal values and experiences. Think of something as simple as playing The Last of Us Part 2. Gamers around the world were presented with the same story, but their personal experiences, values, and biases ultimately shape their perspectives of the characters and, by extension, the game itself, which is part of the reason the game is somewhat controversial. Sometimes it's easy to see your own perspective as the correct one and unintentionally overreact when someone has a different perspective than you. For example, some people don't like dogs, and when others find out, they're usually met with an emphatic, "You don't like dogs? What's wrong with you? Dogs are great!" which isn't particularly respectful or a good way of handling differing perspectives. One of the best pieces of advice I've ever received about managing different perspectives is before you get furious, get curious. What I mean by that is instead of reacting so strongly to someone not liking dogs, you should, when appropriate, ask non-judgmental questions to understand why they have that perspective. There's probably a justifiable reason for not liking them. Maybe they were bitten as a kid, or maybe they're allergic. There are many reasons why someone may not like dogs, and they're entitled to that perspective even if you don't feel the same way. Which leads me to another important piece of perspective taking. You can understand someone's perspective without agreeing with it or changing your own. Perspective taking is about empathy and understanding why people feel and act in certain ways, not necessarily changing someone's perspective. That being said, don't be afraid to change your perspective if and when new and compelling information is introduced to you. So the next time someone comes up to you and wants to argue about how good or bad The Last of Us Part 2 is, make a concerted effort to ask them some questions about why they have that perspective, share your own perspective with them, and most importantly, keep the conversation civil. There's absolutely no need for any golf clubs to be involved. Looking at you, Abby. And that's it. Let me know down in the comments how you feel about taking Abby's perspective for the second half of the game. If you like what you saw today, I'd love for you to subscribe and come back for the next one. Until then, see you around.